All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today here at Ralco for a webinar looking at fueling flock performance, power of gut health in turkeys. Throughout the following webinar, if you have any questions as they come up, you're going to be muted. So if you have something that you wanted to ask, please put it down in the chat. And we'll see it as it comes along and we'll take note of it so that whenever we get to the end, we can answer those questions. And we had a webinar this morning. We got some few good questions at that one as well. So we'll probably bring those up if y'all don't ask them. So with that being said, today you're going to hear from a few of us here at Ralco. My name is Micah Osborne. I'm a poultry product specialist based out of Texas, mainly covering the western half of the United States. And then we have Dr. Tim Broderick, who's our research and development manager, and he's based out of Marshall, Minnesota. And we also have Aaliyah Gelati, who is also a poultry product specialist, and she's based out of Tennessee, kind of covering the eastern half of the United States. A little bit about Ralco. If you aren't familiar with us as a company, we're a family-owned and operated company based out of Marshall, Minnesota. We kind of taken the approach of natural products to targeting some of the industry's leading gut health challenges. We use a lot of essential oils and plant extracts to be able to kind of follow that natural approach. We also look at energy maximizing diets whenever we do a lot of our nutrition work on the poultry, swine, and ruminant side. And then we also have a lot of emphasis on the microbial processes on the agronomy side and the ruminant side as well. And so we have a very large team of PhD nutritionists and researchers and biochemical engineers that kind of take all of our questions from out in the field and then help us put those into a product to be able to attack some of the biggest challenges that we're facing in our industry. And so today we're going to cover the turkey industry and some of the challenges that they face, and is what we have looked at doing here at Ralco to be able to answer those questions.
Thanks, Micah. So one of the things that we often start with is just the general statement that inputs affect turkey production in a lot of different ways. And I say that because this focuses on improving performance in turkeys and also through gut health. And a lot of times we start thinking of gut health as this isolated item, just the gastrointestinal tract or what's happening in the bird. And then from there, a lot of people think of it from the feed side. What are we actively putting into the gastrointestinal tract that can make that change? And that's going to be feed largely. But that's far from the only thing that's going to affect production, and it's far from the only thing that's going to affect gut health. As producers, we all know that water greatly affects animal performance and health, not just in terms of hydration status, but what else is carried in that water. And that includes everything from additives that can interplay with gut health, but also hydration and water as a key nutrient does affect the overall health status of the animal. Lighting, we can stress birds out with lighting, or we can create lighting plans that become advantageous with production. The environment and limitations of a barn. Up here in Minnesota, we have a lot of guys with curtain barns, others with premium sidewalls. So things like airspeed, overall environment, the ability for you to control that environment in different temperature and climate conditions is going to be very different between producers and ultimately can affect the intake patterns of a flock, behaviors, and gut health. Litter and overall microbial load within a flock, as well as obviously feed and health products having a much more direct interplay within gastrointestinal health and performance. When we talk about current challenges, though, in turkey health, we know we have high path avian influenza. We're not really going to focus on that for the topics of this webinar, just because it's a more binary system related to depopulation. However, for avian metapneumovirus, E. coli, coccidiosis, dermatitis, histaminiasis, we see a lot of conditions that maybe aren't always gut health derived or gut health associated, We have things like metapneumo, which is going to be seen in the ocular region and upper respiratory system. We see E. coli and cocci and histomonas at various points within the digestive tract. Um, and from the upper intestines all the way down to the ceca with histomonas, and then dermatitis, on the skin. But a lot of these cases, we're still going to see these secondary infections. And if it's not a primary driver of the challenge within the birds, oftentimes we see it as a secondary issue within the flock. Avian metapneumovirus being one of those prime examples where we can see some issues from a weakened immune system. And even within gut associated conditions such as coccidiosis, we still end up seeing secondary infections from the damage done through Eimeria and protozoal issues within the GI tract. So when we look at gut health, it's related to current challenges in a bunch of different ways, like I said, directly and indirectly. So when we look at avian metapneumovirus as that example, it can cause immunosuppression in the bird. And within flocks, before vaccination, we've seen upwards of 40 to 50% mortality from those producers. Now a vaccine has been entered in the US market and has been undergoing evaluations for the last couple months and does look to improve producer outcomes. But with that, there's still a baseline challenge that can cause that immunosuppression. And so, if it's not the immediate virus causing that issue, what else comes along with it? We see air sacculitis, pneumonia, parahepatitis, that can affect a few different organs within the body, mostly respiratory, but also things like the liver. And with those, we can see not just direct damage to the bird itself, leading to secondary causes of mortality, but we also see challenges going into the plant, higher incidences of condemnations within carcasses attributed to some of these secondary challenges. Additionally, we see direct gastrointestinal issues, such as susceptibility to secondary bacterial challenges. Oftentimes, those are going to be originating from the gastrointestinal tract, either within the GI tissue or because they translocate out of the gastrointestinal tract due to some weakening of the tissues there. Those include things like E. coli, mycoplasma, and ort, as well as gut health challenges relating to a site of infection for protozoa, such as coccidiosis or histomonads. Gut health is animal health. And the reason we have that central image of the turkey on the screen is to help underscore the point that the gastrointestinal tract is actually outside the body. You can see from this image, there's a tube that goes from the beak and extends through the animal, snaking its way through various organs and tubes till it finally reaches that cloaca and exits. But if you stretched it all out into one big line, it becomes a hollow tube. And that's important because that's why we have so much immune receptors and interplay within gastrointestinal health being that animal health. It's a lot easier to see if a bird is missing a wing or got some type of gross leg injury or external assault. It's a lot more difficult for us to identify internal damage to the bird unless we're looking at production trends or overall bird behavior. And within that bird, in that hollow tube, because it's taking things from the outside and putting it in the middle of its body, we end up seeing that account for between 60 and 80% of the immune system of that animal, especially concentrated in the gall or and associated lymphoid tissues within the gastrointestinal tract. And so below we kind of see those two main functions of the gastrointestinal tract at more of a microscopic level. On the bottom left, we see a diagram of the villi and crypts and the microvilli that are really there to aid in digestion and absorption of nutrients. And on the right is some of the interplay of all the aspects of the immune system: T cells, B cells, goblet cells, IgAs, and how that relates to the overall well-being of the animal. And those really serve as those two primary functions of the gastrointestinal tract. And that's reflective in the definition. So it's tough to find a centralized, well-agreed definition for what gut health is. Sometimes it's easier to say what it's not, and that would be whenever we see an incidence of disease. But One that's been cited a couple times is a fairly vanilla definition, something that's gut health is critical for the well-being and productivity of an animal. So let's break that down a little bit more. Well-being is fairly simple, reduction of disease and distress. So what does that actually look like? Low inflammation, tight junctions between cells, reduced pathogen loads, controlling their ability to actually cause disease, and immune development. This is especially important in turkeys as they're one of our more vaccinated species of poultry, partially due to their longer production cycle and also susceptibility to a couple other bigger conditions that can really impair flock performance. So immune development becomes really important for their ability to reduce disease. Additionally, productivity. Productivity is fairly intuitive to most producers. It's simply performance objectives. But how we get there relative to the gut health is important. We look at things like our ability to efficiently digest nutrients. Once we have them digested, can we actually absorb them? Are we taking them out of the gastrointestinal tract and using them for gain? And can we do that efficiently? As I mentioned before, sometimes it's a little bit easier to think in the negative. So what is gut health? Well, it's not gut dysbiosis. So when we look at gut dysbiosis, the opposite of gut health, we see three of those main areas called into attention. Bacteria or microorganisms, which can cause toxin production, translocate out of the GI tract and cause disease elsewhere. We see other microorganisms outside of bacteria, like protozoa, cause distress in this area. We relate that also to cell integrity. So increased permeability under a gut that's not functioning well aids in that translocation of bacteria and can ultimately impair absorption of nutrients from our feedstuffs to the animal. And last is immunity. We start seeing things like inflammation, which is a vital part of the immune response, but causes damage to tissue and impairs performance. We also see overstimulation of immune responses, which sometimes are necessary to control disease, but also cost energy and resources to the animal that would otherwise be put to gain. So when we look at the application of gut health and start getting into the space of gut health additives, we want to make sure that we're aligning production challenges and objectives within each phase. Not all producer systems are undergoing the same challenges at the same time points. And more importantly, different segments within industry are going to have different objectives. Breeder males are ultimately going to be different than breeder females, which are going to be different than a commercial meat flock. Similarly, even within turkeys on the meat side, light hens and heavy toms are going to be treated differently. Everything from nutrition to management. So when we're looking at that meat production side, uniformity, livability, gain, and yield are going to be the core aspects that we're looking for within a production flock. And it's important to gear your health programs towards maximizing those responses. Additionally, we see different time points of stress. For example, brood phase is going to look different than a finisher barn. And it's important to match historical trends within a flock to understand how you can optimize interventions at critical time points. On a breeder flock, egg production, hatchability, and fertility are all going to be important metrics that play into hatch of fertile and ultimately poults per breeder hen. That's going to be kind of the ultimate standard. So understanding what areas in which curves of production we can potentially aid through gut health challenges. What that means is fertility in late breeder flocks is going to be a different challenge than early. Egg production is going to be a lot easier to achieve in an early producing flock than a late. And all those things are also going to have changes in shell quality, which can impact hatchability, as with the overall makeup of the egg. So it's important to match those challenges and interventions. On the male side, obviously semen quality is going to be an important metric as well. So when we look at additives to improve gut health, there's a lot on the market, which makes it a little bit challenging sometimes to discern what's most important. We have antibiotics, probiotics, prebiotics, organic acids, phytonutrients, enzymes, and all these things do slightly different things within the gastrointestinal tract or have specific aims and specific targets. Antibiotics work by targeting bacteria. They are there to reduce specific classifications or species of bacteria that can harm production. Probiotics and prebiotics are often there to enhance beneficial bacteria, either by imparting beneficial bacteria directly through probiotics or by aiding in the growth of those beneficial bacteria. And those beneficial bacteria can then contribute other aspects of production, which Ali is going to cover a little bit later in this presentation. We then get to organic acids or phytonutrients, which are going to contain specific compounds which can aid in a variety of different classifications, from antimicrobial activity to antioxidant activity, stimulation of the immune system, and growth and maturation of intestinal tissues. And then we have enzymes, which are often kind of forgotten when we talk about gut health. That's because the feedstuffs that we're providing aren't necessarily a pathogen, but they can provide some anti-nutritional factors or other challenges within production that then allow for some of those other secondary challenges to persist. So when we look at things like subtherapeutic antibiotic use related to gut health, the goals within antibiotics outside of specific disease treatment include their main objective, which is reducing bacteria. By reducing bacteria, we see reduction in nutrient degradation by bacteria, so more available for the host. We see decreased mucosal thickness because there's fewer bacteria to defend against. Reduction in subclinical infection and reduction in toxin production from those bacteria. However, with natural alternatives and other additives within the gut health space, we see some slightly different pathways to improve performance. On antibiotics, we see therapeutic and subtherapeutic use. Therapeutic being products with that direct efficacy against a target pathogen during a disease challenge, and subtherapeutic being things that can improve overall health and performance. As we mentioned, with antibiotics, we improve performance by reducing mucosal thickness, reducing the overall microbial load, and reducing maintenance energy. But with things such as phytonutrients, probiotics, prebiotics, we're able to yield the same results, but through a different approach. We're able to increase villi height, increase nutrient absorption, and yield an excess amount of energy that the animal can use towards productive performance and gain.
So I'm kind of discussed, obviously, started getting into those natural alternatives. And since it is becoming more and more popular in the industry to use alternatives to antibiotics, especially when it comes to promoting gut health, I am going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into how some of these alternatives work and what it is doing at a gut level. And that kind of starts with looking at how a plant is going to defend itself. So they obviously are very different than mammals. We look at predators like a wolf. They themselves, have abilities to use their teeth and claws to fight to protect themselves. They have a thick coat which could protect them from adverse weather conditions or bites from smaller predators. And then if all else fails, they can just run away. Plants can't do any of that. So they use these specific chemical compounds to defend against any kind of threat that could be similar to threats posed to birds, such as the pests and the diseases. And these phytonutrients that we are extracting from that plant is going to be in the form of an essential oil, which is ultimately what that plant is using to defend itself from predators, because it doesn't have the normal defense mechanisms we think of whenever we think of other mammals and just animals in general. So when we look at some of these oils in front of you, you see our Nexus formulation wheel. And this is going to kind of contextualize some of those components so that we can match them to specific challenges. In the past, antimicrobial activity was targeted, attributable to, essential oils. You think of essential oils, you think of a strong antimicrobial mode of action. However, the benefits of some of these phytonutrients are multifaceted. There's various different chemical constituents in these different oils Even, different species of the same plant, such as an oregano, can differ between species. So some of the benefits that we're seeing from some of these compounds can include the carvacrol that you find in oregano, and that's going to have a really strong antimicrobial activity. The antioxidant activity, where you're going to see eugenol in cinnamon oil play a part. Antiviral activity from compounds such as alpha terpenes, anti-inflammatory activity from compounds like eugenol or eucalyptol, immune regulation from cinnamaldehyde, and then promotion of homeostasis within that gut from saponins. And these are able to bind ammonia in the gut and just help improve the overall gastrointestinal environment. And so when we look at some of the properties of these phytonutrients to be applied to poultry, we use the example of one of our essential oil products called Prosper EO. And Micah will be kind of giving you a summary of that product here in a minute, but there are 3 oils in that product, including thyme oil, cinnamon, and oregano. And we see some pretty astounding benefits when we look at the bird level, such as disease management. And like I mentioned earlier, disease management is also important in plants because they can suffer from fungal, bacterial, viral infections like birds can. But we're also seeing improvements in gut performance, leading to improved microbiome, gut morphology, which ultimately is going to indicate the health status of that bird. And then phytonutrients, they can also impact feed efficiency, your FCR, and meat quality, as well as improving certain egg quality parameters. And if you'll notice, almost each of these benefits can in some way be attributed to cinnamaldehyde. And those that aren't are going to be still impacted by the benefits of the oregano and thyme oils. That's going to further strengthen the beneficial effects of the cinnamaldehyde in that product.
So Tim and Aaliyah kind of gave you a high level overview of essential oils and why, as a company, we look at them to be able to find the right blends of oils that can work towards, a healthier animal. And so what we're going to do the rest of the talk is we're going to go through this product in particular, Prosper EO, and some of the data that we have, some of the background on what is further inside of this product and how it helps the birds perform at a better rate. This product, like Aaliyah said, is a mixture of oregano, thyme, cinnamon, and our Actified prebiotic. It comes in a liquid and a dry product. So depending on the type of production facility that you're in, if you have the ability to make decisions to put something in the feed, this could be something that works really well for you. And if you don't have that capability, we have it in a liquid so that you can utilize it with your growers and your service techs, be able to provide it to those people and be able to use it in that way. If you were to put it in the feed, we recommend anywhere from a half pound to a pound, and then anywhere from 2 to 6 ounces per gallon of stock solution. But this product in general, when we look at it compared to some of our other ones, is more of like a maintenance product, is the way I try to talk about it. When we're dealing with low-level challenges that kind of build up to a bigger challenge, like we see within the turkey industry, E. coli doesn't necessarily start as E. coli. It maybe was a cut that turned into, a greater infection down the road, or in breeders, whenever you have birds jump in and they break an egg inside, it leads to a little bit of peritonitis, which leads to an E. coli infection. And so there's things like that if we can use a product such as this to just kind of mitigate those low-level challenges so that they don't become a larger challenge, then it leads to an overall healthier bird and better performance throughout. And I think with the data we're going to show you here shortly, you'll be able to see the effect that it has.
Yeah. So like Micah mentioned, this product, it's a very well-rounded approach to gut health. And within that, there's really 2 key actions that I'm going to dive into. The first being that essential oil action, and then I'm going to dive in a little bit to the prebiotic fiber and the effects that that has at a gut level. So when we look at the essential oil technology that we have, it is called our microfusion technology. And kind of what that technology does is it helps that oil droplet act in a certain way to be able to not only target and kill the pathogenic bacteria, but allow the beneficial bacteria to proliferate and thrive by giving it a food source, which is going to be that actified prebiotic that I will get to in a second. So kind of like Tim mentioned earlier, antibiotics are really good at killing things, a certain bacteria. Essential oils similarly are really good at killing bacteria. However, they don't necessarily know which bacteria are beneficial and which are pathogenic. So this kind of differentiation between the pathogens and the good guys, so to speak, is pretty unique to us. And when we look at some other oil products, and part of this is it might be the reason why you see essential oil products in the field work vastly, differently from each other. The first competitor we see here, it does a really good job at killing everything. But consequently, that means it is killing the good bacteria like your lactobacillus and your bifidobacteria. That's going to make the animal, it's going to help have that animal take a little while to recover and build back that microflora. Whereas competitor B, not really sure. It killed the good guys, but it unfortunately did not, target that pathogen that we were trying to kill, which is going to be that Clostridium perfringens. And it made it really tough on the animal because not only is it not killing the pathogen, but it's killing the beneficial bacteria that could have helped in that situation. And then the third competitor oil product that we see on the right, it just didn't really perform very well on any of the bacteria. It's almost if the animal was not treated at all. So that's just something that we see kind of helps the microfusion process stand out and consequently have a beneficial effect on gut health because you are keeping all of that, the population of those beneficial bacteria in the gut up while kind of helping to decrease the pathogenic load. So moving on, I'm going to discuss Actifibe, and Actifibe is going to be our prebiotic fiber. It has a great effect on the systemic immune system. The natural polysaccharide in Actifibe helps to pre-adapt the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, like Tim mentioned, or the GALT, which results in that immune system being primed and in a higher state of readiness to tackle health challenges, pathogens, and it also helps to stimulate healthy increases in macrophages, white blood cells. And those are an important part of your innate immune system. So they're going to help the body destroy pathogens and further stimulate your immune function. And then we also do have research that shows Actifibe's effect on increasing cytokine production, interleukin-1 and interleukin-6. We see elevated concentrations of those in the body, both of which play an important role in the immune system. IL-1 is going to have your really strong anti-inflammatory properties, and then IL-6 is going to help recruit some of those white blood cells, lymphocytes, macrophages to sites of infection or injury within the body that can help when you have a disease challenge or a low-level challenge in your flock. Now, the graph on the right compares the effects of Actifibe and echinacea on immune cell count. You may have heard of echinacea. It's a very common kind of tea to treat cold and flu symptoms. However, too much echinacea can start to not be as effective once you reach a certain extent. As you can see in the graph, once you're reaching about 100 parts per million, you're at the prime of the effectiveness of that compound. But once you get past 100 parts per million, you see the effectiveness of that come down drastically. compared to the Actifide, where we're still seeing an increase on that immune cell count as the concentration of Actifide in the diet increases. So I wanted to point out some, field work that we've done, mainly mortality. So the result of these essential oils and Actifide prebiotic fiber maintaining this gut microbiome balance, if you will, of that majority population of beneficial bacteria within the gut and keeping the levels of those pathogens down has more of an effect than I think some people may realize. If you have any kind of flock, there is ultimately likely going to be some kind of mortality because of low level challenges. You can have a flock that maybe you're seeing a slightly elevated mortality because of a heat stress. Maybe you had a hot day. Maybe they have a little bit of E. coli that kind of spiked. Maybe they've got some salmonella. Maybe the power went out and there's some light stress. Any of those, or a combination of smaller stressors, can compromise that immune system and lead to even slightly elevated mortality. And what we see when we apply the Prosper EO in the field, which implements both of the essential oil and prebiotic fiber technologies, is a 2 to 4% decrease in mortality. And this is because these two technologies working together is helping to mitigate some of those low level challenges. We're not talking about, in this specific case, getting, a barn that may have a higher level of mortality. But in this case, there was some health issues, and we were able to see that mortality go down anywhere from 2 to 4% because of those two technologies kind of working in conjunction with each other. Now, another piece of that story, as it relates to the prebiotic fiber and gut health, is the proliferation of beneficial bacteria within the gut. So on the bird level. On the left, we see kind of some background research and look at the increased growth of bifidobacteria in the presence of that Actifide prebiotic fiber. And I don't want to get too in depth on some of the specifics, but bifidobacteria, for example, it plays a role in immune system function and response, but also gut microbiome imbalance, helping to prevent your pathogenic bacteria from proliferating and getting the opportunity like opportunistic bacteria do. And then looking at the graph on the right, you see this in action, like I said, on the bird level. Using the Actifide prebiotic fiber, we can increase the amount of beneficial bacteria that's inhabiting the gut while decreasing the pathogenic bacteria load. And this specific graph is looking at Lactobacillus versus Clostridium. But the question then becomes, we're using a prebiotic fiber for gut health. Why? Why do we want the beneficial bacteria populations? What makes them beneficial? And that is when we can look at one of the key benefits of having a gut microbiome dominated by beneficial bacteria, which is production of short-chain fatty acids. Now, through the fermentation of Actifide, beneficial bacteria can produce short-chain fatty acids such as your acetate, propionate, and butyrate. And these play roles in maintaining the healthy gut and therefore healthy bird via, energy production, pathogen inhibition, decreasing the pH of the gut environment, making it unfavorable, and then stimulating cytokine production, like the interleukins that I mentioned. So out of these three short-chain fatty acids, I do want to highlight the butyrate number. Butyrate is one of the principal energy sources to colonic epithelium cells that are going to regulate your cell growth and differentiation. And Actifide, one of the unique traits about it, that it's the only fermentable soluble dietary fiber that is going to preferentially feed the lactic acid producing bacteria to produce an increased amount of butyrate. And the successful development and maturation of the gut of that GI tract is completely dependent on the reproduction of those colonic epithelial cells, which really makes the prebiotic fiber a really important player in gut and immune system development. So to highlight kind of what that looks like visually, you can see here when we're feeding essential oils that are encapsulated in that prebiotic fiber, you can see the gut health benefits very clearly by looking at the crypt to death ratio. This ratio, it's a measure of gut efficiency. The longer villi that we are getting from these technologies increase the animal's capability of absorption and capturing nutrients out of that diet. Shorter crypts are going to decrease your tissue turnover and therefore decrease your maintenance requirement. And the impact of these multiple modes of action are the ability to strengthen the gut wall for longer and stronger villi, for, like I said, greater nutrient absorption, which really is going to help it reduce the energy expenditure of the animal in fighting disease, regenerating tissues, equating to more efficient growth and performance.
And so here's another study that we did, again, looking at a control group versus a group treated with Prosper-EO. And really what we want to look at and what we see with this trial is on the last data slides, Aaliyah mentioned, that flock was dealing with a really high mortality. What we see here in this flock, a lot less of a mortality, almost 7 points difference in what the control was in the last research trial. And so, whenever we're talking about modes of action and how does a product work and what all benefits do you get, well, you see here, we may not have gotten a super decrease in mortality, but what we did get is we got improvements on our gain. So you see in this trial, we got almost, or a little over 1.5 pounds extra per bird, which in turn led to almost 14,500 more pounds that we took to the plant, and a little bit better feed conversion as well. So, or a little bit worse, a little bit higher feed conversion, but we got more birds of the plant. We got bigger birds of the plant. And so really just looking at, what kind of production parameters do we need to look at, and what are we dealing with within our complex or within our flocks, from flock to flock. And so we really take a look at, the total weight that was gained here, an extra 1.5 pounds per bird. I mean, that really starts to add on. And whenever you look at, well, we're trying to make money here, we're trying to save this, we're trying to save that. Well, whenever you get an extra 1.5 pounds at the plant, what is that worth to you, and what is that worth to your complex?
Thanks, Micah. So the last area that we're going to discuss is antioxidants relative to efficiency. And so when we talk about reactive oxidative species, oxidative compounds are inherently damaging. They cause oxidative rancidity or protein damage or DNA damage. And when we look at the chemical structure of phytonutrients, especially phenolic compounds, it allows for them to kind of mitigate this damage and serve as an acceptor. So we measured using ORAC, which is expressed in Trolox equivalents per 100 grams, and it's really a measurement of antioxidant ability. And compared to a natural vitamin E, which is one of the vitamins that's critical in the antioxidant pathways. So oregano and Prosper are just two examples of those phytonutrient products. I know we've been discussing Prosper a little bit here in the past couple slides, but across different reactive oxidative species, we see about 100x more efficacy in antioxidant ability compared to natural vitamin E. But more importantly, we see that efficacy spread over 5 or 6 different areas. What that means is we don't just have more protection against these oxidative compounds, but we end up seeing a greater diversity of coverage for peroxynitrite, hydroxy radical, peroxy radicals, superoxide anions, all these things that are formed through different pathways. And that's really important to just give greater coverage to the animal across a variety of different oxidative challenges and stresses, because for me, oxidative stress relates very well to efficiency. Now, all the attributes that Mike and Ali have been discussing previously related to antimicrobial activity or enhancing the gastrointestinal function and tissues, enhancing beneficial bacterial species, all of those are ultimately going to play a huge role as well in the efficiency of the system in the GI tract. But anytime that we can have something that produces a chemical that allows for reduction in damage, we're going to see an improvement in efficiency, because every time we're reducing damage, we're reducing a time point where the animal has to devote its own resources instead of gain towards repair.
And so speaking of efficiency, whenever we take a look at this trial, we see efficiency. You know, we see the decrease in mortality that we touched on earlier. We see better gain of about 1.2 pounds per bird, an extra 27,000 pounds at the plant. But where we really start to see it is the feed conversion. I know if you're looking at this and numbers jump off the page, and that's close to 19 points better on feed conversion, and you might think that that is an insane number, and I think it is kind of high, and it's hard to believe sometimes, but whenever you just look at the way these products are developed and the way that we're trying to go after a well-rounded product, focusing on efficiency, focusing on gain, focusing on building up that gut, it speaks to the capabilities that this product might have. And so, whenever we look at all the research put into one, there's multiple different factors that go into each study, and there's multiple different factors that play into each flock of birds. But with this one, we saw a really good efficiency bump, as well as a lower mortality and a little bit better weight gain as well. And so what we also want to do is kind of show you an example of how phytonutrients provide you that benefit beyond antimicrobial. In this example, we're going to show you what Prosperio, along with the essential oil blend, along with the prebiotic, provides just a much broader mode of action. As we mentioned earlier, essential oils can reduce pathogens through antimicrobial activity, but that's only a part of the story. And I think that's where a lot of people get hung up on whenever they think about essential oils, is the antimicrobial. But when formulated accordingly, they can preserve beneficial bacteria and also feed the beneficial bacteria through the actified prebiotic. This in turn increases the number of beneficial bacteria that in turn reduce the pH and produce antimicrobial compounds to outcompete the pathogens for the particular butyrate, which is a primary energy source for the gut wall. This strengthens the gut wall, keeping tight junctions so toxins and pathogens can't pass through, and it also improves the performance of the goblet cells, which enhance the mucosal layer, which is a very important barrier to the gut wall. And the other thing that butyrate does is it's critical to the growth and maturation of the immune system. The result is a strengthened immune system to better respond to challenges. And this is just a great example demonstrating those properties and the competitive exclusion and immune regulation in addition to antimicrobial activity. And so, like I kind of spoke earlier whenever we brought up that Prosper slide, application may dictate efficacy. And so you really have to look at what are your production parameters and what are the opportunities that you have. If water makes sense, then we can look at intermittent versus continuous. It really speaks to what kind of challenges have you seen over past flocks, and is something like Prosper in the water on a continuous basis good for you, or do you maybe split it up where you run kind of a program, maybe 14 days on, 7 days off, 14 days on, or do you want to do it just continuously, adding 3 to 5 ounces per gallon of stock solution for an extended period of time? Same thing with feed. Feed phases always depend on what you may do, and say you're really seeing some challenges in past flocks during your grower phase, well, then you may have it in your grower phase, and then we also see a lot of uptick in mortality towards the later end. So maybe we split it and we do our grower and our withdrawal phase, or we just run something continuous from the grower, the finisher, and the withdrawal, and really just shows to kind of the different capabilities that this product has and the ability that you can use within your production system to kind of determine what would be the best for our group. And so the last slide that we have that kind of has all of our research data on one, just kind of overviewing it all. You can see these first 4 studies were done with a with a feed add product at a 1/2 pound or 0.6 of a pound per ton, continuously feeding, along with a control product. So was BMD or Avatec 90 or a competitive program. And we really see that decrease in mortality. In some of these trials, we see an decrease, or I guess an increase in feed conversion, where the birds get a little bit more efficient. And then we see an increase in body weight within the rest of them. So it's just overall trying to show all the different trials that we've done with this product and how those products can how this product can help out in your specific facility. Sorry, words are escaping me. So why should we consider phytonutrients? I think if you look at the data that we have and really paying attention to those raw numbers, the improvement on body weight, the improvement in feed conversion, and that reduction in mortality, they kind of speak for themselves. When just trying to understand, how are these products working and how can they help us within our own production parameters. Return on investment, nutritionists, veterinarians, we all kind of look at everything from a dollar standpoint. How much is this going to cost us, and will we see that ROI when those birds get to the plant? Is it going to be worth it to us? And I think depending on the challenges that you have and the situations that you're facing, it very well could, whether we're getting that increased feed conversion or we're just getting pounds at the plant, or maybe we're just getting a reduction in mortality. I think the ROI can really play into, your own production facility. And then just ease of use. Our water add products, they have shown capabilities to be mixed with chlorine dioxide. Same thing with feed products. They can be added in with things such as like a coccidiostat or other things like that. On the broiler side, we've talked to some customers who have been seeing uplift in their coccidiostat when using a product like Prosper, just allowing it to be a little bit more efficient. One question that we did get earlier today was, different types of water treatment products, can it be used with those? And I would say if you're dealing with some really heavy acids, trying to clean out water lines and just trying to keep stuff going like sulfuric acid or something like that, I'd maybe hold off on using that at the same time, and never mix an essential oil product in the same stock solution that you would another water treatment product. So like if there's something that you have to run, I'd run that just because you get a little bit heavier dilution in the stock, and so you maybe just don't want to either decrease the efficacy of the oil or decrease the efficacy of the water treatment product. And so with that, we'll open the floor to some questions. I think we had a couple come in. Tim and Aaliyah would probably be better to ask or to answer. But with that too, if at any point after this presentation is over, you have a question that you want to ask us, all of our emails are right here if you want to take a snapshot of those. Please feel free to reach out. We'll see what we can do to help you out and get your birds on the right track.
We did get a question, and I think Tim, if you want to take this, can you use this product with a vaccine? Is there any interaction? I think is what.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So On the Prosper EO side, you can use it in vaccines, or during a period of vaccination, with the exception being if you're running a water-based vaccination and using Prosper EO in the water. And in that case, we would strongly advise you to follow all vaccine manufacturer recommendations, which includes, flushing lines, running some vaccine stabilizers or other additives there to really clear out and mitigate any water interference, and then running the vaccine. We actually have seen in some research positive results relative to vaccine titers, both titer level and uniformity of vaccine titers. The other big thing, though, relative to vaccination, and I say big because it's relevant to what we see on the metapneumovirus side right now, is we've been seeing with metapneumo vaccine, if you're giving any type of boost, that you really want those birds to be in good health. And so, as I mentioned earlier, when we're talking about gut health in general, where gut health is animal health, that becomes a really important aspect. Because even in the vaccine side, we can see some almost field mimicking challenges just related to a little bit of suppression. And we want to make sure that those animals are in a really good status to receive that vaccine, just because it is ultimately going to be a test of their immune system. So we want to make sure that they're in a good health status while receiving any type of vaccine, especially with the newer metapneumo vaccines.
I think that pretty much sums it up. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to reach out to one of us via our email, and we'll be able to get you some more information if you want some infos, labels, some other research analysis that we have based on Prosperio. We'd love to be able to get that to you. So please feel free to reach out. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon.